Welcome. My name is Justin, and I am an addict. I have been actively working the steps in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013, and am grateful to be sober one day at a time, thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts. RICO 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcoholism, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, just to name a few. Each Friday at noon Central Time, we hold a live lunch hour speaker meeting with a recovering addict from anywhere on earth, pertaining to any or no faith tradition, and with any background, who shares their experience, strength, and hope on a specified recovery topic of their choice. For the 12-week period that we started on March 4th, going through May 20th of this year, we are focusing on each of the 12 steps of recovery. Our speaker today will share for 20 to 25 minutes on his experience with step 5, and then the live audience gets the opportunity to ask questions of him for another 20 to 25 minutes. To get weekly invitations to join us, please go to rico12.com/join us. That's RECO12.com. Submit your email address there to get the reminders and links. Donations and podcast ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated, and details on doing that will be in the chat of the live meeting and also in the show notes of the podcast. If you feel RICO 12 is of value, it really does help us and others hear about us by doing the rating and reviews in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It's a great way to work our step 12. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, growth, and worth in each of us, the listening audience. A quick disclaimer: while we hope that these episodes will be helpful to both sponsors and sponsees alike, the 12 weeks of these episodes on the steps are not intended to replace the necessity of working with a sponsor through the steps. We will not be working the steps in these meetings. They are meant only to be a supplement and informative reference on what the steps mean and why they are important to the individual speaking about them. Now, step 5 reads, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, here's a little bit about our guest speaker, Eric H. Eric H. is a 42-year-old practicing Roman Catholic. He was married at the age of 24 while in active addiction. And after having an emotional affair for several months at the age of 40, that same woman introduced him to the SA program. Eric knew that if he was going to continue in addiction, that it would bring shame and damage to himself, his family, and his faith community. He entered the rooms on January 16th of 2020. His oldest daughter, age 5 at the time, was emotionally detaching. Eric was having visions of living his fantasies vicariously through her. These became the founding ideas upon which his first step was built, and why he finds the 5th step so important to recovery. Eric's current mission is to practice these principles in all his affairs and to teach his family to practice them as well. Eric, we're excited to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Justin, and thank you for letting me be here. I'll start in this vein. God was calling me to be a speaker for one of these 12 steps, and I didn't want to. I thought there were other people much more qualified than myself to be a part of this 12-step series, and what ended up happening is over time, listening to the other podcasts, you kept asking for speakers and speakers and speakers. And finally I reached out and I said, okay, if there's an open spot, I'll take it. And you replied, oh, the 5th step is the only one left. And I ended up taking it, and it's actually one of my favorites. And thinking about it now, I literally, doing my morning meditation earlier, had this spiritual experience. I don't know who out there is listening, and maybe this is simply for myself, but God really was calling me to be here today. So I appreciate the opportunity. Right above me on my board, a bulletin board you can't see above my screen, I have my personal motto, and it says, we do the difficult every day. The impossible just takes a little bit longer. And I really take that seriously. And it's important to me that whatever reason it is, I don't know why God put me on this earth to do this, but I have found myself doing difficult tasks over and over and over again. And the simple just doesn't excite me. I love doing things that are difficult. And The fifth step is, like it says in the big book, extremely difficult for a lot of people. And it was for me as well. And so I'd like to share a little bit about my experience. Like it says in the bio, I am Catholic. And so there's that component of going to confession that it states in the big book. And so I kind of want to weave those kinds of things together. But I do want to start at the beginning a little bit, because I do think that it's important to my recovery story, and hopefully for some other people, that I came into the rooms by going to confession. I was standing in line. It was December of 2019. I was in line for confession, and I was praying that I would be able to talk to the priest that I knew. This woman, like you said in the bio, had introduced me to this program, and I knew who that priest was, and I knew which church he was at, and I really wanted to be able to talk to him. And God answered that prayer while I was in line for confession, and I had the opportunity to sit down with him. And unbeknownst to me, he did a fifth step with me. I had no idea, because he asked me a question. He said, "Eric, how many times a month are you acting out?" And I had to honestly reply. I said, "Look, it's not how many times a month, it's how many times a day." And he rocked back in his chair with wide eyes, and he's like, "Eric, you got a problem." And I said, "I know, I need help." And that was the impetus for being led into the rooms of SA, and the genesis of my recovery journey. And for that, I am eternally grateful. So I'm going to pull out my big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wrote some notes down just for my own remembering. And the first thing that comes to mind is the fifth step comes at the very beginning of chapter 6 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the chapter is titled Into Action. And for me, action has been a big part of who I am and my life. There are some people I know that enjoy watching sports. I hate watching sports, but throw me a ball, invite me to play a game, I'm in. Like, I love doing the action. I don't enjoy spectating necessarily. And so it's interesting to me that the first 4 steps are really about introspection. And I love our previous 4 speakers that have shared on the 4 steps. I've taken something away from every single one of those people that have shared on that. And then the fifth step is really the nuts and bolts. It's the capstone. I'll get to that in a minute, but it's this idea that the first 4, where we take individual actions, I figure out who God is in my life, the God that was wrong and the God that I want to have in my life. And then I make an inventory of all the things that I want to make an inventory about, all my character defects, my fears, all of the things. And then we step into action. We take the fifth step. And like the big book says, it says, if we skip this vital step, and I think that's important, if we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking or whatever our addiction might be. And I believe that to be true. Justin shared with me before we came on a reading about theological versus spiritual ideas. And what I had been searching for 40 years was a theological answer to my problems. And it's not a theological solution. It doesn't matter which faith tradition we come from. What we're seeking is a spiritual solution. And I had been caught up in this idea that if I just went to church more, if I prayed more, if I went to confession more, if I did all of these things that my faith tradition tells me to do, somehow I will find peace and serenity. And that's just not the case. And I think a lot of us have experienced that within our faith tradition, or even if we don't have a faith tradition, that it's really a spiritual solution that we are looking for. And what happened to me was, so I came into the rooms January of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And so I was able to meet some folks in the program face to face before we switched over into the Zoom platform. And so I was lucky enough to meet a guy that is my sponsor, met him locally, but we don't share a faith tradition. So we ended up working the first 4 steps basically apart because of the pandemic, but he took the time to come see me in the middle of 2020. We sat in my backyard, and when I was ready, after doing the first 4 steps, he came and saw me, and we sat down and we did the 5th step face to face. And that part of my journey was incredibly important. And The reason is I was scared to death of going to confession to out myself to the priest. And there were some things that I was holding on to. And like it says in the fifth step later on, it says psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We've spent thousands of dollars for examinations. We know but few instances where we have given these doctors a fair break. And I was one of those guys. I had gone to see psychiatrists. I had gone to see psychologists. I had looked for all of these other solutions. And quite honestly, I wasn't honest with any of them. I wasn't even being honest with myself. And so by doing the first 4 steps with my sponsor and then being able to sit down with this person and out myself, I had this spiritual awakening. And it brought me this sense of peace, this sense of solitude. And I knew that in that time that we spent together, that the God of my understanding actually cared about who I was, what he wanted me to be. And it was really this beautiful experience. And then all of a sudden, this fear I had about going to confession went away. I knew I was going to be able to walk into the confessional and be able to be honest with the priest for the first time in my life. And so I'm going to turn the page here real quick on to page 74 of the big book. It says, those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course, will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty is to receive it. You know, that was really, really difficult. It's an interesting story because I called up. So the same priest that I talked to back in December of 2019, I ended up going to give my 5th step confession to. And when I called him up on the phone and said, hey, can you hear my confession? He said, sure, stop on by. And he gave me a window. And so I showed up and he said, okay, I've got 15 minutes right now between whatever activity he was doing. And then he was going to go say mass for his congregation. And I said, all right, well, I need to do this 5th step confession real quick. And he looks at me again with those same big eyes. He said, Eric, we need more time than that. And and he's like, why didn't you tell me? I don't know. I just asked for confession. You said yes. So anyway, we had to make another appointment. And we went back and I spent an hour and a half with this gentleman and going through all of these different things that I had already gone through with my sponsor. But those of us that are Catholic know that if we don't make a good confession, meaning that we purposely leave things out, it doesn't count. And for many years, I had been lying to my priests. I'd been lying to people in my faith community. And honestly, I'd been lying to myself. And by doing the 5th step, it was an opportunity for me to stop lying to everybody, including myself. And I didn't realize how deep those lies actually ran in my own body. I thought I was a very truthful person. I thought I was an honest person. And in many ways I am. But there is a vein of me that wants to be dishonest. And like it says other places in the big book, you know, I was a very good actor. I could put on a facade. I could show people side of me. And I think our previous speaker, either the 3rd or the 4th, talked about this, that all of a sudden the different circles we run in, we're trying to be the actor for all these different circles, and it doesn't make sense. And I'm glad not to have to do that anymore, that I can be Eric H. in all of these different circles, and I can be myself, and I don't need to be scared or afraid of that anymore. So, you know, it's one of the things that I a lot of depraved things that I do as a sexaholic, but Justin read it in my bio, and I think it's really important to my own spiritual journey is, you know, there's 3 things that I find incredibly important. One is my relationship with God, and that has only been strengthened through working the 12 steps. Like I said, I didn't need a theological solution. I needed a spiritual solution, and I found that working the 12 steps. The second is a relationship with my wife, and that has been strengthened as well by working the 12 steps of recovery. And the third is with my children. And I don't know how many people know the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule, but those are the 80%. Like the other 20% pale in comparison to those 3 things in my life. And my oldest daughter, I was still in active addiction when she was born, and for some very formative years of my life. And I look at her. She turns 8 in about a month. And she's an important part of my recovery journey. And I talk about her all the time because there is a distinct line in the sand between when I was acting out actively and now that I'm in recovery. And it's not perfect, but I can see her making progress and I can see myself making progress. And it's this beautiful thing to be a witness to that. And one of the things that I had to admit in my fifth step was this idea that as a sex addict, I was having all of these sexual fantasies. And one of those fantasies was that my daughter would grow up and, like any father would, I believe, I know my dad had dreams for me growing up. And, I was having these fantasies of my daughter playing this acting out role in my life, this vicarious, maybe she'll grow up to be, somebody in the adult entertainment world, right? And it's hard for me to say, I just skipped a beat, right? It's hard for me to freaking admit that, but it's reality. And as much as that reality might suck, it's what it is. And I'm so grateful that that's not the reality anymore. I'm so grateful that this program has let me see that she can live her own life with her own choices, and I can be totally happy with that. And I don't need to live out the fantasies of my mind or vicariously through anybody else, and I don't need to act out anymore. And I really, it's that capstone in the archway, and I have it marked right here, page 75, says returning. So it says page 75, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we've done. That's tough, reviewing what we've done. I did a lot of messed up stuff, and I think a lot of other people have probably done some messed up stuff. It says, carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch for which we will walk a free man or woman at last. The 5th step, it's that capstone of the arch. And I can't remember, I think it was somebody on this podcast talked about an archway. And you don't fix an archway by removing the capstone. If you remove the capstone, the whole thing collapses. You put more pressure on the arch. That's what keeps it standing. And that's why I believe that God was calling me today to talk about the 5th step, was a reminder to myself that when my life becomes unmanageable, when I fire the God of my understanding and try and take over my will, my life, etc., I try to play God in my life and in the lives of others, it doesn't work. The arch starts to fall apart. And the only thing that fixes it, because I've built this arch, is putting more pressure on the capstone. And so I appreciate the opportunity to share today in that regard. I just recently picked up a copy of the 12 and 12, and I don't know who else has still not read this, but there's some beautiful stuff in here as well that I'd like to share. And I'm grateful that I've been able to start reading through the 12 and 12. And it says, one of the things here, page 57, step 5, what are we likely to receive from step 5? For one thing, we shall get rid of that terrible sense of isolation that we've always had. I don't know how many other people out there are like me, but I have felt extremely isolated. I felt extremely lonely. I was bullied a lot as a kid, and part of my acting out, part of my early acting out was trying to be a chameleon because I didn't know how to act in the world. I was trying to be everything to everybody. People please, that's one of my character defects. And it just left me feeling empty and alone and afraid. And I hated that about myself. Right? It says, almost without exception, alcoholics are tortured by loneliness. Even before our drinking got bad and people began to cut us off, nearly all of us suffered from that feeling that we didn't quite belong. And I hated that feeling. I hated that feeling of not belonging. And it's in this program that I have found a place where I belong, a place where I feel comfortable. It's absolutely amazing to me every day that I get to wake up and talk to people like Justin, like other people in my program that are going through a similar path. And we both smile and nod our heads and say, yeah, I relate. I get that. This makes sense. I've had the same experience. And all of a sudden that loneliness, that isolation, whatever it is, it's like, oh, I'm not the only person. Right. And, it's thinking back about the other 4 people that have done these presentations, right? I've listened to and related to every one of those shares in some way, shape, or form, right? There was something from the first step that I related to, something from the second step. Sarvi started talking about her kids. It's like, yeah, I relate. I've got kids of my own. Cameron and Harvey, right? The third and the fourth step, I can relate to a lot of what they said. And it's just awesome that I am not the only person going through this. It's awesome that I don't have to make any of this stuff up. It's common to all of us, right? And I love that about our program. And then I think I will finish here. Page 59 from the 12 and 12, it says, hence it was most evident that a solitary self-appraisal and the admission of our defects based upon that alone wouldn't be nearly enough. It's not enough to just say, I have a problem. We have to do something else. We'd have to have outside help if we were to surely know and admit the truth about ourselves, the help of God and another human being. And what I read in that, what I've learned about myself is this outside help idea. What was I working on for 40 years? What was that outside help? And it was my acting out. It was my addiction. It was this external presence of, in my life, a sexual addiction. And that was the outside help. That was the spiritual connection that I was yearning for and craving for, and it never felt quite right. And what's the outside help that I get in this program? I get to turn to others and say, I need help. I don't need to listen to other people's advice. But when I turn to somebody and I say, I need help, there's that spiritual connection that occurs. And it's not one of addiction. It's not one that goes away. I was reading in my own spiritual literature today about the thirsting for something more, the thirsting for something eternal, and the quenching of that thirst for something eternal. And I find that in the program. It's that spiritual connection. I don't need like I said, I don't need a theological connection to somebody. I need a spiritual connection to somebody. And that's what this program gives. I can't explain it. I really can't explain it. It's absolutely a miracle to me that, I started with, we do the difficult every day. The steps aren't easy. They're difficult. I remember, I think it was last week, you had a discussion with somebody about what the term trudge means. And somebody had told me, I was listening to the recording, and I remember that coming up, and somebody told me that trudge isn't necessarily just kind of mucking along, although it can be. Trudge simply means to walk with purpose. And the steps have taught me to walk with purpose. And sometimes you got to walk through the mud and it sucks. And it's difficult. But like the last line of my mantra says, the impossible just takes a little bit longer. And, I'm 2+ years into this program. I'm not done yet. The impossible is still happening, but God's making the impossible happen. I don't have to make it happen. I just got to do what he asked me to do every single day. And sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it really sucks. But he's making the impossible happen. And for that, I am eternally grateful. And I will end there and turn it back over to you, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate you sharing your experience, strength, and hope there on step 5. A reminder to our live audience, if you have questions for Eric, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other, and we'll get to those as we go along. I've also written a few questions as Eric was sharing. And with step 5, Eric, I think and you did a great job of building to that point. Step 4 talks about a fearless and searching, and I always put the word thorough in there in my own mind also. Moral inventory. In your experience, tell us why it's important that searching, fearless, thorough, moral inventory, and then carrying that over into step 5, making sure I'm not minimizing or justifying my actions when I do that step 5.
Yeah. Sorry, can you rephrase the question a little bit?
Yeah, happy to. So with the searching and thorough and fearless moral inventory, why do you feel it important to also be completely honest, searching, fearless and thorough in doing the confession part of step 5 with another human being?
Oh yeah. Thank you. Excuse me. So it's one thing to be thorough with myself. It's I do a pretty good job. I don't know if anybody else is like me, but I can do a pretty good job of being self-reflective. I can do a pretty good job of being thoroughly honest with myself. But as an addict, I don't want to be thoroughly honest with anybody else. I only want people to see the good side of me. And one of the things that I found in my own step 2 and 3 work was I only wanted God to see the good side of me. And I was scared to death of admitting to him my faults. And what my sponsor, and I credit my sponsor with this, is he talks about the program as being God with skin on. And I don't think he got it. I don't think he made that up. I think it's probably something that he got from somewhere else. And that's fine. And I truly believe it, that this program, the 12 Steps of Recovery, is God with skin on. And so I can do all of my personal work, steps 1 through 4. But if I'm not willing to be honest with another human being, I've found for myself, I'm not actually being honest with myself. And I do this on a daily basis. Step 10 inventory with a DSR partner. Is there anything that I'm hiding? Is there anything that I have not uncovered or am not being honest about? And that's a daily routine. And that's why I find step 5 so important. You do it the first time to clean house. Or at least that's what I did. I did it the first time to clean house, to be totally honest with myself and speak those things out loud. And the same is true for my faith tradition, right? Why do I speak these things out loud? And what's interesting to me is in our faith tradition, we don't do it as much anymore, but there is the option of having the veil or the curtain in front between me and the priest. And honestly, I look at it from a 12-step program option, right? That there's a certain amount of anonymity that comes from the veil being between me and the priest. And there's a reason for being anonymous, right? That what I am doing is I'm not revealing myself to the other person necessarily. Who am I revealing myself to? I'm revealing myself to myself. I'm revealing myself to God of my understanding. And he saw it all anyway. He has experienced it all anyway. It's not the first time. I'm not special. There's that humbleness that comes from doing it, right? And that's really what I experienced in doing step 5. It was humbling for me to admit to someone else and to myself that I am a really messed up human being, because I can be really self-righteous. I can put on a good show for everybody. And that's not actually who I am. I'm good in some areas and I'm really lacking in some areas, and God sees it all anyway. So why not be honest with him and say, hey, I'm really struggling here, God, this is not fun for me. And that's what I've really found is as soon as I became okay telling another person that I'm not doing all right, life became really easy. It became freeing because it doesn't have to be perfect. I just have to keep making progress, keep trudging the road, keep walking with purpose.
Yeah, thank you so much for going into that and delving a little bit deeper into that. We have a question from Zach from our live audience. He says, thank you for your share, Eric. I struggle with perfectionism and have tried to make my step 4 perfect. And I worried if I was sharing everything I needed to share. Could you share your experience on finding a balance between healthy thoroughness versus unhealthy perfectionism in working the steps?
I can, I think. One of the things I learned by doing step 4 is, and any of the other steps, it doesn't necessarily need to be perfect the first time around. And that's hard as a perfectionist. I strive for perfection. And that's not a bad thing to strive for perfection. There's also some grace in recognizing that things don't need to be perfect to be wonderful. And I've also learned that by working the steps. In fact, my step 4, I spent a long time because I tend to revert to a perfect form of the English language, right? And resentment to me was those things I was carrying around that were like super high level, right? Things that I was just super pissed about. And it took me a long time to come to the understanding, and working with my sponsor gave me a lot of grace. And he worked with me because he wasn't understanding it either. And I had talked to other people in my program. I said, I'm not getting this step 4 thing. I just don't understand. And what we finally came to the realization, he sat me down one time. He's like, Eric, I had 3 or 4 things on my resentment list. That's all I had. And I kept saying, I'm done. He's like, you can't be done. I kept saying, I'm done. I don't know. I'm not resentful of a whole lot of things. And he said, okay, I think we got a difference of opinion in terms of the definition resentment. And he finally said, Eric, are you mildly annoyed with people? And I said, yeah, I'm mildly annoyed with a lot of people. He said, okay, start there. Start with all your mild annoyances and write all of those down. And that's where I started. That became the genesis for my real step 4. Was there were a whole bunch of people that I was mildly annoyed with from high school, from my college years, from all of these things, right? And all of a sudden that became, and then it started to click. Oh, these are my resentments. And quite honestly, sometimes I still have to work step 4 because resentments pop up. I was talking to Justin earlier today. I had a resentment pop up between him and I. And I immediately, it was about 3 seconds long. I'll be honest about that, because I realized my part was like way bigger than Justin's part. So I came to that realization very quickly. So it's okay if it's not perfect. You'll come back to it. And I found that with other steps too. Step 9, especially working with my family and things like that. There's things that I know haven't come up yet, that one day will come to light. God will disclose to me how I've hurt people in my family, especially. And I'm ready to make amends when that comes up. So it doesn't necessarily need to be perfect. Just do the best you can.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. And I'm glad to know that we're good again. So awesome. One other question I have here, and once again, a reminder to our live audience, if you have a question for Eric, type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your window. You talked about the archway and the way to repair and fortify an archway is to put more pressure on it. What are some ways that you have experienced, either, voluntarily putting pressure on that archway or having that pressure put on there to help strengthen that archway rather than pulling out the keystone or any of the other pieces?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that comes to mind right now is listening to the step 3 and step 4 talks. I've been having some real challenges in my life recently. My business that I get paid for is a family business, and so that comes with its own set of family dynamics, dysfunctions, etc. And that's causing stress. My family situation is also causing some stress, and I've been purposely putting myself through a program through my faith community to kind of stretch myself, because I was feeling very comfortable in my 12-step journey, quite honestly, and I had not experienced any heavy waves or storms in my 12-step recovery. It had been pretty benign, and so I wanted to see, before the crap really hit the fan, what life might look like if I was put under duress. And so I've been doing this program through my church that's really put me in that spot. And I found a lot of weaknesses of myself, and my character defects crop up and all of these things, and learning for myself, how do I live with those? And one of the things was I didn't feel qualified, quite honestly. Like 9:30 my time, I'm out here in California, so 9:30 Pacific time, I'm literally having tears running down my face because I don't feel qualified to be here. And I was reminded in that moment of 2 things. 1, I am qualified to be here. Excuse me. And 2, I think Cameron talked about it last week. This idea of self-pity being pride in reverse. And I was reminded of that I didn't feel qualified to be here because the other 4 speakers, to me, in comparison, seemed way more qualified than I do. And I was having that self-pity, and Cameron reminded me, no, that's pride in reverse. And so in that moment, I recognized, no, that capstone needs some more pressure. I need to push down on it, because God called me to be here. I don't know why, but he did. And I need to take that seriously and do the best job I can, because that's what he asked me to do. So that's me doing his will today.
I love that. What other experiences do you have where maybe you didn't feel qualified, maybe you felt not up to the task, but God said, "Hey, I need you to do this," and you chose to do it, and it worked out? Do you have anything that comes to mind in that? Because I think that relates to step 5 here. And
Sure.
let me back up a little bit. I've talked to a few people who were trying to work the steps by themselves, and they got through their step 4, whatever that looked like, and they said, it is nobody else's business to hear what my step 4 is. Why should I even think about sharing it with somebody else? So taking those 2 questions about hard things and why it's important, and how God, our higher power, strengthens us to do those and make us equal to those tasks. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like I said in my bio, I take the steps pretty pretty seriously these days. And step 12 reminds us to put these principles into action in all of our affairs. Excuse me. I don't feel qualified for a lot of things that I do, quite honestly. And that's one of my character defects. And I don't like it about myself. And so I ask God to remove it on a regular basis. And I honestly believe if I'm not willing to be honest with somebody else about what those character defects are, I'm not willing to be honest with myself. And then it becomes easy to ignore or self-medicate or do anything else. And I'm called to rely on my higher power, not to rely on myself. This past year, in June of 2021, I was asked to go to, for my business, for my work that I do, I was asked to travel to Idaho for a job. It was about a month-long job. And it was difficult for my family for me to be gone for a month. And I did not feel qualified at all to be the person in charge. And when I arrived, I was very nervous. I was very afraid. And I was reminded by a couple of people that, Eric, it doesn't really matter. They're even less qualified than you. And that scared me even more, right? It's like, oh, geez. But after that job was done and I had this sense of accomplishment, I did a decent enough job. And to me, I did a decent enough job. And this goes to a previous question about how do you know when it's perfect enough? I didn't think I did that great of a job, but going back to that customer and listening to them talk several months later, they said, Eric, you did such a great job for us. We want you back. We're going to do another project and we want you to be a part of it. Wait, what? So apparently I have a skill set that I might not even acknowledge in myself. And I think that's why the 5th step is so important, right? That sometimes I don't even want to acknowledge to myself that I'm a good and decent human being, right? I'm so hard on myself. That's another one of my character defects is I'm super hard on myself. I people please, I'm hard on myself, and I want to do everything perfectly. And that's a perfect storm for self-destruction. And that's why I find, working these steps, including the 5th step, talking about it to all of you who are gathered here today, as part of my recovery.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I love how I've been talking to somebody recently who in recovery who really thinks it's vital in working step 4 and step 5 to acknowledge character assets in addition to the defects. And so often, and in my initial walk through the steps, it was all about, hey, let's dig up the negative, let's put it out there, shine a light on it, and give it over to God. Do you feel it's important to also acknowledge those assets and really try and develop those, and maybe even find some of the defects and see how they can become an asset if possible? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's something that I worked with my sponsor on for sure. Excuse me, throat's real dry now. So it's something that I worked with my sponsor on, and one of the things that I recognized again right before coming on this program was that I do have a set of assets that maybe I'm not even willing to acknowledge. I don't need to necessarily compare myself to other human beings. I've got my own assets, and those things are good. I've got a brain that I've got an engineering degree, and I put that to good use. Apparently, I'm a pretty decent dad. My kids really like me, and we do some great things together, and they're appreciative of that. So, man, yeah, I believe that I do have some assets and some things to share, and I was reminded of that recently by somebody. I called him up who's also in a family business, and I was really down on myself, and he said, Eric, you've got all these great skills, and you listed them out. You're great talking to people. You've got a great heart. You love people. You're super compassionate. You're empathetic. You're all these things. Like, what? He's like, yeah, you've got this great skill set. And I was like, thank you for the reminder, because I forget that about myself. And again, if I'm not willing to acknowledge it, I end up lying to myself, or somebody lies for me. And you're right, turning those defects into assets. Again, one of my defects is people pleasing. And what's the asset? I can try my best to do what you think is right. I can try to deliver a good product. But at the end of the day, if you don't think it's a good product, that's not my problem. Maybe I want it to be, but it's not my problem. And knowing that is really helped me, especially in my career, not having to worry about what other people think of my product, what other people think of whatever skill set I have. That's on them. It doesn't need to fall back on me.
All right. So I have one more thought here. I remember when I shared my step 5 with my first sponsor, the embarrassment, the fear that at the end of it, he was going to say, Justin, you are one sick puppy. I don't ever want to see you again. What is your experience with that, whether with doing your own step 5 or maybe somebody else's step 5, and your thoughts and feedback that you received from the person that you shared it with?
Yeah. So my sponsor is 10 years older than I am. And when I first came into the rooms, take another drink. He shared a story with me, his personal story. And I had a vision before I even walked into the rooms of recovery of where my life was going. And he laid it out, 10 years older than me. And I knew 10 years down the road, I was going to be in that same exact spot. So he's done stuff. I consider myself a pretty high bottom. And I've listened to other people share that have much lower bottoms than I do. And he's got a lower bottom than I do. The fact is that I'm 2 years into this program. Could I go back out there and start doing those same things? I absolutely could. And I acknowledge that on a daily basis, that today is just today. Tomorrow I can choose another way. And I don't necessarily want that lifestyle, but every once in a while there's a trigger that says, oh man, this thing would be really enjoyable. And I listen to other people's shares about their experiences, and it's not my experience, but every once in a while one of those things is super triggering. It's like, oh yeah, that might actually be fun to try. And thankfully I'm still sober today, but recognize that that might not always be the case. So I'm certainly grateful for the fact that I didn't fall as far as quote unquote somebody else. And I was talking yesterday about not judging other people, and I certainly didn't feel judged in my 5th step. And I don't judge other people as much either, because I recognize that just because I haven't fallen that far doesn't mean that I won't fall that far. And the reality is, God gives us whatever amount of ladder in the hole necessary to climb our way out. And then he starts to fill that hole back in. And that's awesome. It doesn't matter how deep the hole is. He's got a way out.
That ladder is always longer than the hole is deep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that, and you mentioned earlier that you're doing a program in your faith that helps you look a little bit deeper into these things. And I have no idea what that program is, but yeah. I have found for me, in addition to doing step 5 and really digging out the actual things of my past, shining a light in the dark recesses of my soul and saying, oh yeah, I could go there. I'm grateful I have not gone there. Now let me really look at it clearly so I can make the decision now that if and when that opportunity ever rises, I know what that looks like going forward, and I will choose not to do it.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that type of, I think it's called shadow work if in a lot of places, but what are your thoughts on doing work like that? Do you think that's helpful or harmful, or what do you think?
Yeah. So when I started doing, and the program's called Exodus 90 through my church. And so it's a 90-day program, and you give up a bunch of things. And one of those is that I'm obligated through this program to fast a couple of times a week. And we know from working the 12-step program, the acronym HALTS, right? Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sick, stressed. Well, if you're fasting a couple of times a week, I've literally been hungry for 90 days straight. And that's a challenge, quite honestly. But doing the shadow work, I didn't know going into the program what I was going to learn. I just knew that God was asking me to stretch myself and not live a life of comfort in the 12 steps. So I didn't know how hungry I was going to be for 90 days. And I've kind of been a jerk to a lot of people, including my family, the last 90 days because of that. And I'm not proud of that. But what it's teaching me is that I've got more work to do, especially in the vein of emotional sobriety. So it's one thing to get rid of the chemical dependence that I've done the last couple of years, but there's a whole emotional sobriety piece that I haven't even really scratched the surface of yet, that I do need to work on, because I was emotionally hungover, and I had the same effects like when I go out and drink with my friends. I don't do it much anymore, but that same hangover feeling, the headache, the upset stomach, all that stuff was present a couple of days ago, and it was because I had an emotional hangover. I was really spun up about stuff I didn't need to be spun up about, and I splattered that all over my family, and it wasn't pretty. And coming out of the backside of that, it's like, oh, I recognize what this feels like now, and I don't want to live like that. So now what's the difficult thing I need to do? I got to work those steps too. Got to work on the emotional sobriety.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing that experience that you've had recently. That's helpful for me, and I'm sure for many others to hear, hey, I'm not the only one that gets angry when gets grumpy when I'm hungry, right, or whatever, Yeah. And it can, lots of things can be made aware in those stressful type situations. All right. Before we wrap everything up, Eric, do you have any final words of wisdom before we start closing this down?
I wish I did, but I don't.
Very good. All right. So I'm going to do the closing reading, and then we'll have that prayer here in just a second. Excuse me. All right. Thanks again, Eric. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question or you have other questions, please go to rico12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that may come up there. I invite the audience to come back next week. And next week, we will be continuing on the 12-step series with step 6. Our guest speaker will be David G, and he's gonna be a really good speaker. He's excited, he's energetic, and everything. And it'll be a good meeting, and we look forward to seeing you all back here then. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with a prayer from the heart that Eric will be the voice for.
Thanks, Justin. God, we thank you that we know you better. We thank you for giving us this program of the 12 steps. We thank you for the people that you have presented to us to help us in our journey. We thank you for their voice and for their heart. We thank you that there are people who will listen with compassion to our story, to our winning and our losing. And we thank you that when nobody else is around to listen to us, that you are still there, guiding us, caring for us, and wanting us to be better people. We thank you for everything you have given us. Amen.
Amen. Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching for glimmers of light. Feet still on the ground, I can still be found. Standing still.
I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered. I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and binded with the seal that I am bowed and broken. I am standing still.
Only God knows where the path of life will yet lead me. I do not even ask to know. I do not need to see.
It is enough to know that I'm loved and not alone. And with those truths, I thankfully march into the unknown. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching.